Hello Leafs Nation, I'm Rick Scarborough and you're watching Blue and White Weekly, where we bring you weekly updates on the Leafs and the hockey world at large. I regret to inform you that this is the last episode we'll be shooting in this studio, as our team prepares to move into a brand new one in time for the playoffs and next season, but that's not what's important. What's important is we have a brand new week of Maple Leafs hockey to talk about, so let's get into the news. Before we begin, I'd like to dedicate this episode to three members of the hockey community that we lost this past week. Hockey Night in Canada commentator Greg Millen, who stood tall in goal for several teams throughout his career, most notably with the St. Louis Blues. Former general manager Ray Shero, who won the Cup with the Pittsburgh Penguins in 2009 and most recently served as a GM advisor to the Minnesota Wild. And former Leafs goaltender and later general manager Gerry McNamara, who is most known for helping to create the rise of European players in the NHL when he discovered Leafs legend Börje Salming on a scouting trip to Sweden. All three of these men spent their lives helping those around them and making the game of hockey even better, and they will be missed. And now let's get into the news. After tying the all-time goals record last week, Alexander Ovechkin passed Wayne Gretzky's milestone exactly one day after our last episode came out. I'm not mad about it. I'm not mad that we missed getting Ovi's record-breaking achievement into the last episode. You know, an episode that we named after him, that we put him in the thumbnail of. I'm not mad about it at all, Ovi. Congratulations. Nevertheless, Ovechkin scored a classic, rifling one past New York's Ilya Sorokin on the power play from the top of the dot to become the greatest goal scorer in NHL history. Immediately after scoring the goal, the game was paused with 12 minutes left in the second to have a full-blown 20-minute ceremony, rolling the carpet out onto the ice and welcoming Ovi's family alongside Gretzky himself and Commissioner Gary Bettman. I suppose it's a case of the lesser of two evils, listening to a Gary Bettman speech or watching 60 minutes straight of Islanders hockey. Colorado Avalanche captain Gabe Landeskog returned to the ice this week. Landeskog has been on LTIR since then with a knee injury and joined the AHL's Colorado Eagles for a handful of conditioning games this week. The Montreal Canadiens collected last year's 5th overall pick Ivan Demidov this week from the KHL. Demidov had 49 points through 65 games with SKA St. Petersburg this year and 5 points in 6 playoff games. He also set the record this year for the most single-season points by an under-20 player, a record previously held by the Minnesota Wild's Kirill Kaprizov. The Habs are on track to match up with the Washington Capitals and their Russian stud in the first round of the playoffs, so it only makes sense for Montreal to want one of their own. For the first time in franchise history, the Winnipeg Jets have clinched the President's Trophy as the #1 team in the regular season. I can't wait for the fans to hype this up just for the team to fumble it in the first round again. And yes, I know a Leafs fan shouldn't be talking about first round collapses, but I am. Do something about it, Jets fans. And now let's get into the games of the week. The week kicked off on Tuesday with a pivotal divisional matchup with the Florida Panthers. Ahead of this game, theories were ablaze that Florida was tanking into a wildcard spot in hopes of matching up with the Leafs in the first round. And no, that's just not the case. I'm sorry, I love a conspiracy as much as the next guy, especially a hockey conspiracy, but Florida is just missing all their best guys right now, unfortunate for them, and that's why they were on a 5-game losing streak coming into this one. The game was scoreless halfway through the first until Gustav Forsling kicked it all off with the sole goal of the period, 1-0 Panthers. Later on in the second, only about a minute in, amulet powers would activate as John Tavares carried the puck into the Florida zone and rang it off the elbow of the crossbar, tying the game. And despite that beauty from JT, the rest of the second belonged to the Panthers, and that trend continued in the third as Eetu Luostarinen regained the Florida lead and Carter Verhaeghe picked up the empty netter. Leafs lose 3-1. There was no time for the Buds to lick their wounds, however, as it was on to Tampa the very next night for a clash with the Lightning that, after giving up 2 points to the Panthers, became all the more important. Mitch Marner opened up the scoring fast, picking up a turnover in the Tampa zone and snapping it past Andrei Vasilevsky. The Leafs' top line would continue the pressure from there as Matthew Knies had scored just moments after Marner, and this isn't the last time I'm going to be saying Matthew Knies' name. Just before the end of the first, however, Nick Perbix would answer for the Lightning, so the score is 2-1 going into the second. And the second would be a relatively boring period with no goals scored and only one penalty, an interference call on Scott Laughton. So we'll fast forward to the third as Oliver Bjorkstrand ties the game less than a minute in. But Matthew Knies would return the Leafs to the lead with his second of the evening. And again, this isn't the last time I'm going to say his name. Victor Hedman would tie the game back up and send us to overtime, securing each team a point in the standings, and it's there in overtime that Matthew Knies completes his hat-trick and gives the Leafs the win. This is the first time a Leaf has finished off a hat-trick in overtime since the great Matt Sundin did so in October of 2006. After that, a 2-day gap to come back to Toronto before the final Hockey Night in Canada of the season against the Montreal Canadiens. Now, I'm not going to call this game boring like some have, but I am going to call it low event. So let me just rattle off the need-to-know info. The Habs never hit double-digit shots in any period. In fact, they had more shots in the third than they did in the first and second combined. And overtime didn't have a lot of shots either. In fact, it only had one, which was Mitch Marner's game winner. Leafs win 1-0. What a barn burner. Speaking of Marner, he took shifts on defense in this game, as with OEL and McCabe injured and Leafs not having a lot of roster spots or cap space available, they ran a short D bench, only dressing 5 guys and having Marner back up where needed. What a great game to go to overtime, though, as both the Habs and Leafs still need points in the standings. The Habs continue their hunt for that final wildcard spot in the East, and the 2 points in this one locked up home ice advantage for the Leafs in the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. And that'll bring us to Sunday, where we had our final second half of the back-to-back for the year as the boys jumped to Carolina for an afternoon tilt with the Hurricanes. The game had to wait until the dying seconds, and I mean dying seconds, only about 13 left in the first period for its opening goal, courtesy of Pontus Holmberg. In the second period, Austin Matthews would build on that lead with his 31st of the season and 399th of his career, 2-0 Leafs. And speaking of goal milestones, Willie Nylander would make it 3-0 with his 45th of the season before Sebastian Aho gave the Canes a ray of hope on the power play. A ray that was quickly snuffed out by John Tavares as the Leafs ride off into the sunset. 4-1 your final. And so with that, let's take a look at our race for the Atlantic Division title. The Leafs sit with 50 wins this season and 104 points. If Toronto either gains 1 point or Tampa Bay loses one, the Leafs will clinch the Atlantic Division and would face the first wildcard team, the Ottawa Senators. The last time the Battle of Ontario occurred in the playoffs was the 2004 first round, where the Leafs would take the series in 7 games. Looking ahead in the week, the Leafs will head to Buffalo on Tuesday to try and snag an important 2 points against the Sabres. Then we close out the regular season on Thursday at home against the Detroit Red Wings. We'll have all those games for you next week, plus a preview of the Stanley Cup playoffs and so much more. But for now, thank you very much for watching, Leafs Nation. Be sure to like and subscribe. And remember, go Leafs, go. We'll see you next week.